Okay, Chris is stuck in traffic. I'm going to give everybody a preliminary reminder that we're trying to give every single class now, and that is remember to speak up. Because there are people that are watching at home, like my dear wife. She's not feeling very well, and since this is a class, people make good comments. We teachers, we try to repeat some of them, but if you're loud enough, we won't have to do a lot of repeating. So turn up the volume to 11, because I think it only goes up to 10. Turn it up to 11, and pretend you're talking to somebody that maybe you just have to yell across the room at. Because if you think about it, in a way, we are a little bit across the room. If we were just having a conversation, notice I'm stalling until the teacher gets here. If we were having a little conversation, it's like, I'll pick on Leon because he's probably about the furthest away. Leon, if you and I were talking side by side, we'd probably talk at this volume, right? Yes. Sitting closer helps, that's for sure. But people are trying to hear from one side of the room to the other, trying to hear online. So the topic that we're going to be looking at tonight, and somebody asked me why we're not doing the book on Wednesday nights, and maybe a good decision, bad decision, but I wanted to keep the continuity on Sundays for those that can't be here on Wednesdays, but use Wednesday nights to kind of go in depth on topics that are related. Like I said, maybe a good decision, maybe a bad decision. But we're in chapter 5 in the book, and we're going to be finishing it this Sunday, and it's on 2 Corinthians 8 and 9. And what we're going to be looking at tonight is a topic that's related to 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, and that's the Israelites when they plundered the Egyptians. Then they took those gifts and they used them wrongly. Then they used them rightly. And we're going to even find out that when they were using them rightly, Moses had to beg them to stop giving because they had too much. And so the connection that we find with 2 Corinthians 8 and 9 is the concept of grace, giving, begging, using it for self or versus using it for God. So everybody get your Bibles and turn to Exodus. Let me get out my notes real quick. Because unfortunately, I don't have the Bible memorized like some people are able to do. Exodus 3. Now Chris says he's interested in having a discussion with me on this. I'll wait for him to get here before we go into that if he decides to. But you see in verse 19 through the end of the chapter, however, I know that the king of Egypt will plunder the Egyptians. And you see that's the beginning of the 10 plagues. Now turn to Exodus chapter 12 and verse 36. This is towards the end. But you look at verse 35. The Israelites acted on Moses' word and asked the Egyptians for silver and gold items and for clothing. And the Lord gave the people such favor with the Egyptians that they gave them what they requested. In this way, they plundered the Egyptians. Now, when you look at this, let's look at the history. the Egyptians were what to the Israelites? They were their masters, right? Okay. So the Egyptians were the masters over the Israelites. How long were the Israelites in total in Egypt? How many years? Yeah, I've got, let's see, it says right here, I read someplace, was it 430? Yeah, chapter 12, verse 40. The time that the Israelites lived in Egypt was 430 years. How long were they slaves in Egypt? I don't know how long they were. Was it, why do you say 200? Okay. We do know that they became slaves when what happened? Yeah, a Pharaoh arose who did not know Joseph. So how many generations that was, we do not know. We do know that when they got into Egypt, they were favored. Then time happened and they were forgotten. Fear made them the enemy of Pharaoh. They became slaves, and for a total of 430 years was the time that they were in there. So how much possessions do slaves generally have? Yeah, not much, if anything at all. Why would they need gold and silver and jewelry when they left?
They used it to build the tabernacle.
Yeah, so buy supplies, build the tabernacle. I mean, there's practical things going on. We know that sometimes that they tried to make deals with other nations. So it was both practical and spiritual. And then they did something crazy. So why would the Egyptians give a human perspective? We want you out of here. Or divine, God intervened, or a combination of both. They were able to collect all of these things from the Egyptians. And doing so, if you go back to Genesis chapter 3, Exodus, I'm sorry. Not everything goes back to Genesis, I guess. Some goes back to Exodus. We just kind of covered a little bit, and I'll let you take over the history, and we just asked the question, why would the Egyptians want to give all of these expensive things to the Israelites? Conclusion was they wanted them out of there, and God intervened. And why they needed the gold and silver for practical means as they were traveling, but also to build the tabernacle. So for practical and spiritual, and we haven't gone into much else.
All right.
This.
Yeah. All right. All right, let me pull this up. Perry, I had a chance to glance over this post, see your argument, and I was, but only one chance, and I was sitting there kind of formulating some thoughts on my way here. I think I disagree with you.
Wait, somebody disagrees with me. That's never happened before.
All right. So I take it that you have alluded to Exodus 3.
Yeah, but we didn't go into my thought exercise. I didn't
Okay.
know. I was leaving that totally up to you if you wanted to bring that up or if you just wanted to go a different direction. You're the head teacher.
I think it's pull this thing out. I think that it's probably worthwhile, given the way that you put it and the evidence that you bring to bear. So yeah, let's go ahead and get into that. So I think you were laying out your case, is what I understand when I walked in.
No,
No. Okay.
no, I was just going over the history.
All right.
Like I said, I didn't know if you wanted to talk about that word plundered or if you just wanted to go a different direction.
Yeah, let's go over there though. So in Exodus 3, we get this prediction, let's say, that this is going to happen. At the end of Exodus 3, when God is talking to Moses, he tells him, and I will give this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. And when you go, you shall not go empty, but each woman shall ask of her neighbor and any woman who lives in her house for silver and gold jewelry and for clothing. You shall put them on your sons and on your daughters, so you shall plunder the Egyptians. Then, of course, we go over to chapter
12.
Chapter 12. Beginning, 36 is our target, but beginning at verse 33, Moses tells us, the Egyptians were urgent with the people to send them out of the land in haste, for they said, we shall all be dead. So the people took their dough before it was leavened, their kneading bowls before being bound up in their cloaks on their shoulders. The people of Israel had also done as Moses told them, for they had asked the Egyptians for silver and gold jewelry and for clothing. And the Lord had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they let them have what they asked. Thus they plundered the Egyptians. So, one thing that kind of stands out to me here is the terror that you get on the part of the Egyptians in verse 33. And read in light of that, when we're told that God had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, I think what maybe we should understand that simply to mean that he was, not that they thought positively of them, but they thought, anything we can do to get these people to leave is probably what we need to do. So that's maybe an initial thought there. All right.
The reason why he's looking at me is I posted a little thought exercise on Facebook. I have for years wondered if the word plundered is actually the wrong way to translate the Hebrew word here. If you look up the word Hebrew, or if you look up the Hebrew word, it means just basically to take away, and can mean positively or negatively. But it's often used positively in the sense of to save or to deliver. And I was wondering if this was a symbol of a type of atonement, in the sense that while the Egyptians were, in a sense, afraid, they did think very highly of Moses and the people because of their God. You find that in Exodus 11 and verse 3, if I got my passage right. The Lord gave the people favor with the Egyptians. In addition, Moses himself was very highly regarded in the land of Egypt by Pharaoh's officials and the people. And if the idea is that they plundered, the word plunder means basically to take by force. And we don't see anything in the context that they were taken by force. They asked, and the people were giving. And I think that this is sort of God's way of releasing them, not necessarily because the people were, trying to keep them enslaved anymore, but the only ones that were trying to keep them enslaved now were Pharaoh and his soldiers. And the people started to respect the God of the Israelites. They respected the leader, Moses. And the idea that God gave them favor or grace is the idea of they thought highly of them. And, we don't have to spend a lot of time on this, but I've just wondered if the idea that, they're robbing them is the wrong idea, but rather that they're being given all of these things because the people are saying, basically, save us by getting out of here. Yes.
It seems to be the women who were getting.
It seems to be the women.
It seems to be the women are the ones who are getting this gold and silver and the clothes.
Yep.
They're asking, probably the women are working in the homes of the Egyptians. And I don't know if you've ever had anybody work in your home or not, but I remember Tom's mother and father. Tom's mother was a paraplegic, and so they had people who would come and stay in the home. You build a relationship with those people. And you learn to respect their character if they are people of good character. And I suspect that's what's happening here. The people are developing a relationship with these women who are working for them.
Which again kind of argues that this isn't a forceful thing. Now, the reason why I find this interesting is it's a bigger picture of the effect that God had on the entire nation. And that this is not just a scene of them, of the Israelites receiving grace from God in escaping, but rather also the Israelites are receiving grace from those that are around them because of their God. And so I look at this as the greater impact of God's people having an impact on those that are around them because of what God has done for us. And I just find it an interesting thought. And what's going to follow this, though, regardless of whether it should be plundered or whether this way they will save and deliver them from more plagues, what's going to happen is, what did they do with this gift when they left? And that's really where we want to focus. Just take that idea, think about it, and but I don't want to spend the entire class on whether or not it should be this or that. But I wanted us to see that this is a scene of grace one way or the other.
We'll spend 1 or 2 more minutes on it. I kind of, as I was thinking about this, Perry, something that came to mind for me was the story we read in Joshua about the capture of Jericho. And it seems to me that in both cases, you have how do I want to say this? You have an action, a goal that on the face of it should be accomplished by aggressive and or violent means, that is then turned around and accomplished in a, let's say, a non-aggressive way. I mean, I have to wonder, what some of these Israelite soldiers thought that first day they were traipsing around the city of Jericho. And this is what comes to mind for me when I read this. We're taking advantage of a situation where the Egyptians are fearful, and I don't know. I don't get the impression that I don't know if the text supports the idea that they that found favor in this situation means that, there were a lot of positive feelings. Otherwise, I think you might have just seen Pharaoh and the Egyptian army go after Moses himself rather than go after the people as a whole. I don't know. Mark.
Introduced to us over in chapter 3 and verse 21. It's the Lord saying, I will give this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. Who's that? Jehovah God, Yahweh. Is that right? Sure. I will give them favor in the sight of the Egyptians. And when you go, you shall not go in.
Yeah.
So are you not going to have lessons on providential grace?
Yep.
You might want to reconsider this verse and think about that. It's all about God. It's not whether or not the people found favor. I mean, they just lost their kids. Their people were killed. And they were enemies of the Israelites at that time. How would you feel if the God of these people had just killed and massacred all these young ones because of the plagues and all the other problems that were coming upon them? What attitude would you have? So think about that as you consider whether it was truly the people or God. I'm leaning towards God every time.
Well, one thing we know for sure, and that is that God is the one that is causing this grace or favor within the hearts. And we know that it was needed for the people. So another application is you've got God providing for his people, not from themselves, because God is going to be using the concept of grace to allow these people to receive something that they had not earned. And we're going to see that it's going to be for their benefit, so that they could travel, but also to be used for him. And so go ahead.
Yeah. In chapter 12, once we get the mention of, let's say, the handover of the jewelry, the handover of the gold, the text moves on, and it basically leaves that there. It doesn't really elaborate too much, and so as Perry says, it's kind of it's maybe kind of easy to lose track of that. And so what we want to spend the rest of our time on tonight is looking at these episodes where that wealth, where that gold, where that jewelry is going to reappear.
And where's the first place it reappears, people? Golden calf. Yeah. So where did the former slaves get all of this gold to build this golden calf or golden calves? Where did they get all of this surplus so they could do this? Well, you could answer the Egyptians, but the answer we really want to focus on is they got this because of the grace of God. As Mark pointed out, God caused them to have favor or grace. And so here you've got all of this bounty they did not earn. They have been slaves for however many years. They leave, whether the goods are given to them generously or fearfully or a combination of both. The first opportunity that they have, because it doesn't take that long to get to Mount Sinai, the first opportunity they have to use this, they fail. They don't use it for God's glory. They use it out of fear. And they use it breaking the Ten Commandments that were being given. They use it based upon how they were raised, the culture of the Egyptians, and not the culture that God is trying to give. What kind of applications can we make for this? You receive something by God's grace. Does it have to just be money? Okay. One of our themes for this year, categories, is practical grace. We're going to see how the word grace is used to refer to gifts that God gives, such as Romans chapter 12, the ability to do things. Now, I could take a gift that God has given me and I could use it for His glory, or I could use it for my own glory. I could use it according to a culture of grace, or I could use it to a culture of fear. And so they used it according to human culture, culture of fear, instead of for God and His glory. Can you think of examples where today somebody might take a gift of grace from God and use it not for God, but out of fear or out of a human culture?
Their work and put all their time and effort in their work, and then know that God's blessing them, but they are selfish and keep all that for themselves and think it's like all about me, like Nebuchadnezzar, I did all this.
Absolutely. Anybody else?
I think of people who have talents for entertainment, people who have talents for entertaining. But generally speaking, they don't use those talents in a way that would honor God, because they let their ego overcome, if they had a love for God to begin with. They let their ego become first, and they want the pride of using those talents in a way that they'll be glorified, not God.
There's a preacher, I won't mention his name, that was extremely gifted as a writer. And he sold many, many books. I've got his books. He is an excellent writer. And he was a gospel preacher. And the more popular he got, the further away he got from the gospel. And he stopped teaching, baptism is when we receive God's grace. In other words, baptism was no longer for forgiveness of sins. He even got into the possibility of speaking in tongues. And I look at him and I think of all of the gifts that he has from God, and instead of using it to try to bring people to God, he used them to become more part of the culture. And it's really a shame to use God's gifts, not for His glory, but for your own glory. Yeah. Yep. Okay, I've been doing enough talking. Your turn, Chris.
All right. So I guess I had planned to go into the text a little bit, but I think we've already covered it. So let's move ahead a couple of chapters, and let's talk. I think one of the things we see here is the duality of God's people in the Old Testament. In Exodus 32, the story of the golden calf, obviously we see them take their earrings, specifically their earrings, and melt them down for the purposes of this calf. We see them give generously and give eagerly for an idolatrous purpose. But in a couple of chapters, we're going to see them do something a little bit different. So let's look at Exodus 35. Now, we have, obviously, we have spent a good deal of time, if you've moved through Exodus up to this point, you've spent a good deal of time going through the regulations for how the tabernacle was to be built, what was to be put in it, how that stuff was to look. And then furthermore, we will have gone through extensive regulations about the priesthood, about how the priests were to be ordained, what their role was, and all that sort of thing. So then, when we come to Exodus 35, we are ready to build this thing, ready to build the tabernacle. In Exodus 35, beginning at verse 20, we read this. Then all the congregation of the people of Israel departed from the presence of Moses. And they came, everyone whose heart stirred him, and everyone whose spirit moved him, and brought the Lord's contribution to be used for the tent of meeting, and for all its service, and for the holy garments. So they came, both men and women. All who were of a willing heart brought brooches and earrings, and signet rings and armlets, all sorts of gold objects, every man dedicating an offering of gold to the Lord. And everyone who possessed blue or purple or scarlet yarns or fine linen or goat's hair or tanned ram skins or goat skins brought them. Everyone who could make a contribution of silver or bronze brought it as the Lord's contribution. And everyone who possessed acacia wood of any use in the work brought it. And every skillful woman spun with her hands, and they all brought what they had spun in blue and purple and scarlet yarns and fine twined linen. To continue, all the women whose hearts stirred them to use their skill spun the goat's hair. And the leaders brought onyx stones and stones to be set for the ephod and for the breastpiece, and spices and oil for the light, and for the anointing oil, and for the fragrant incense. All the men and women, the people of Israel, whose heart moved them to bring anything for the work that the Lord had commanded by Moses to be done, brought it as a free will offering to the Lord. So the gold, the wealth that they brought from Egypt shows up again here. This time, in the form not just of earrings, but in a variety of types of jewelry, in expensive dyed fabrics. Remember that that fabrics that are dyed in this way, blue, purple especially, these things are extremely costly in the ancient world and were highly prized. Of course, then we go on, we get into some other items as well. But here we see that the emphasis now is upon their hearts, their spirits having been moved. So whereas they were moved in one direction a little bit earlier, now we see them moving in another direction.
Did you happen to count, because, I mean, I didn't, how many times the word heart is used within this text? Because it was used repeatedly, especially if you go back to verse 4 and start it, because in verse 5 it says, let everyone whose heart is willing, and you just keep going down, and whose heart is willing, whose heart is willing.
Mm.
And it's just,
and that is important, because of course they could have conscripted all this stuff. You know, Moses could have said, okay, everybody owes such and such an amount, for this project. They could have gone about it that way, but the text,
right.
Text points us in a different direction.
In verse 29, it actually uses, in this translation, the phrase free will offering.
Mm-hmm.
And so you see there's a a lot of comparisons between our giving today and this giving. Our giving on the first day of the week is free will. Our giving is supposed to be done willingly, for God loves a cheerful giver. We also will find in our text that that we are to give willfully. But you also find another type of giving here, not just of material things. What else did they give? Absolutely. Skills and time. So they're giving themselves, which was a phrase that we used in 2 Corinthians chapter 8. Paul said they first gave of themselves. So you give of yourself first. That can include your skills, your time, and that will also include your financial goods that you have also.
At the very beginning of that chapter.
That's a good reminder, isn't it? Yeah. A good reminder. It's like, okay, people, this is about the Sabbath rest. How much rest did you get before I rescued you? As we talked about a couple Wednesdays ago, how all the Ten Commandments seem to go back to that introductory phrase. I am the Lord your God, who rescued you, who freed you from slavery in Egypt. And you found that repeated again and again and again. Okay, we're going to talk about the rest. Oh, by the way, now that you're resting, something you couldn't do, something that God allows you to do, let's talk about building him his tabernacle. What were you going to say, Jerry?
Verse 6 and 7, you talk about grace and how that was given and how the grace is given back, and that Moses put out word, hey, stop, we've got enough.
Yeah.
Don't send any more.
That's because, as we talked about, and there's another connection to the chapter, grace is the best motivator that we have. When you're giving out of thanks, then that is far more meaningful. Many, many years ago, I gave Janet a, quote, just because gift. Now, probably I should do that more often. She's watching. And I remember her telling other people, they said, oh, I love this. Oh, it's just, he gave it to me just because. Now that struck her heart, because it wasn't, oh, it's Valentine's Day. Oh man, I forgot, it's Valentine's Day coming up. Or Mother's Day, or birthday, when you are obligated to buy a card or take them out to eat.
Did you say buy a car?
By card.
Okay.
By card.
I really step up my game.
But just because, and it just meant so much to her.
Okay.
Free will, not because you feel any constraint.
Barry,
Yes, sir.
kind of reminds me of, I made her a plaque once. It was for no reason, but just for being you.
Gave me an award.
Employee of the month.
And she remembers that.
It's hanging on the wall.
It's hanging on the wall. That's right.
All right.
I'm done.
No. I've always kind of been, when I read through here, when I read through 35 and 36, one thing that stands out to me is this emphasis on skill and skillful work, and giving giving your best, not just giving your, yeah.
You go back to chapter 35, talking about Bezalel.
And Aholiab. Yeah.
He has filled him with God's Spirit, with wisdom, with understanding and ability, and every kind of craft to design artistic works in God, silver and bronze, to cut gemstones for mounting, and to carve wood for work in every kind of artistic craft. He has also given both him and Oholiab, son of Ahishmaach, son of the tribe of Dan, the ability to teach others. He has filled them with skill to do all the work, and so on and so forth. Now, would you say that Bezalel was pretty gifted by God? Very much so. Does it look like these are things that he just spent every working hour trying to arrange, and then God said, "Oh, you're just right for the job. I think I'll pick you." Yeah. He has filled him with God's Spirit. He filled him with wisdom, with understanding. What else did he fill him with? And this is also important. Not just the ability to do, but the ability to teach others. Absolutely. And that's another wonderful gift. But all this I would put again under practical grace.
Well, I think we're about out of time, aren't we?
We got 3 minutes, talk.
3 minutes. All right.
3 minutes.
Yeah. So, I think our overall purpose here, of course, was to kind of start with the plunder of the Egyptians, or the spoiling, to use the King James language, or the asking of the Egyptians. Kind of take that material and carry it forward, because in some ways, when it's mentioned early in the book of Exodus, it's not necessarily a focus of the text. It's there, it's mentioned, but it's not something that is dwelt upon at great length. But then if as we pay close attention to the development of this story, we see it play an important role in Israel's life at two different points.
Can I add this? It's at the beginning, as you pointed, and you said it's not giving that much emphasis. But what emphasis it does have is this: God's word will be fulfilled. God will keep his promise. Mm-hmm. He's letting them know before the plagues ever happen. When you leave here, you're not leaving here as slaves with nothing. You are leaving here with all of these belongings that are the Egyptians. But I am going to make sure that you get them. So they have hope at the very beginning. God will fulfill his promise. And that's what grace is about, people. God fulfilling his promise for us. Mark, you had something?
Each one giving as they purpose or of their ability. Even the one who gave the acacia wood, that was the base behind the gold going on to the Ark of the Covenant. So each little intricate piece was important. So when people think that what they're contributing doesn't amount to much, it adds up to a lot.
Yeah. You got wood, you got gold, you got the skill to make it into something, and it only comes together when everybody acts in unity as one. And all of this is God's grace. It's an example of stories that you find in the New Testament. They're found in the Old Testament, but they're supposed to be continually found in our lives too. God has rescued us by his grace. He has given us his gifts. How are we going to use them?
All right. That's all the time we have. I think we're going to probably, do the last half of chapter 5 on Sunday?
Yes.
The grace
Chapter
that
5 in the
motivates?
book.
Yes.
Test. Am I on? Okay. Is it 513? 517? Okay, is the hymn, invitation song. Several years ago, 1915 to be exact, and an American physiologist by the name of Walter Cannon did some experiments on some animals. And he found out that when you put a living creature under a very life-threatening, stressful situation, two things happen, fight or flight. And he's the one supposedly that coined that phrase. So, in other words, if you're in the Smoky Mountains, you're walking down a trail, you see a black bear, brown bear, or grizzly bear, if you made it this far over, come at you, usually you're going to pick up a stick, fight back, or you're going to do what I would do, and that's run. So, but later, another term was added to it called frozen. And the catalyst of that term was at an event that took place in March of 1977, which was the worst airline disaster ever recorded. And that event took place on the little island of Tenerife, which is part of the Canary Islands. What had happened, several jets had been diverted to that airport, and that morning they were getting refueled and so on and so forth. And a dense fog had settled across the island, and two jumbo jets, 747s, were on the same runway. One was the KLM plane, which is a Dutch plane, and the other one was a Pan Am American plane. And the Dutch plane had 248 people on board, and the Pan Am had 396 on board. And because of some miscommunications and a little bit kind of trying to jump the gun a little bit with the KLM, the Dutch pilots, they were convinced, well, the runway's clear, so they take off. And remember, it's real dense, the fog is real dense. They didn't see the Pan Am flights, they were just a few hundred yards in front of them. The Pan Am pilots desperately try to maneuver the plane off of the runway. They get broadsided, and the KLM pilots, they see what's happening. They pull the stick and try to get airborne, which they do slightly, but the engines and undercarriage, or the landing gear, plows right through the Pan Am, the upper part of the Pan Am plane, just wipes out first class and parts of the fuselage behind it. And when the Pan Am pilots, well, before that, the KLM plane did get a little airborne, but stalled and crashed and killed everyone on board. The Pan Am pilots, they mentioned afterwards that it wasn't a huge crash, it was just a soft thump. Well, the pilot reaches up to hit the switch to stop the fuel going to the engines, but he grabs empty air because the ceiling's been ripped off. He didn't even realize it. They get out, so does all of the cabin crew, the pilots and those in there. They manage to survive. But down below in the economy class, there was a man by the name of Jack Rideout, and he quickly essays the situation and knows what's going on, keeps his cool, unbuckles his seatbelt. He gets up and he sees this huge gaping hole in the fuselage. We can get out. And he sees a stewardess over there trying to activate a float to push it out because it's like 30 feet from the tarmac. And she's pushing that out, trying to, so people have a soft landing. Well, the oxygen tanks begin to explode above them, and a metal fragment hits her in the head and kills her instantly. So Jack runs over there. He pushes the float out, and before he jumps, he's like, look, everyone's still in their seats. And so he runs up and down the aisle saying, get up, you can save yourselves, unbuckle your seat belts, get out. But he noticed that they just all had this blank look on their faces, just kind of frozen. And he pleaded with them. They weren't injured. Some were, but most of them were not. They could have gotten out. So he eventually just jumped out of the fuselage, landed on the float, and basically got out with just a few scrapes and bruises. And unfortunately, the flames got the rest of the passengers, and the total amount of everyone killed was 583 people. So that's the worst airline event we've had where people were killed. And as I was reading about that, I thought, fight, flight, or frozen. Those people were frozen in their seats. They just didn't do anything. They just sat there doing nothing. And I thought, that's how people react to Jesus. You think about the Pharisees, they fought him. They wanted to throw him off the cliff. When he did the reading in the synagogue, they wanted to stone him, eventually crucified him. And then you had those who fled from him. He had the disciples, apart from the apostles that followed him, but they got to the point where they just turned around and left. They just walked away from Christ. And then you had those who just really did nothing. And I think a good example of that is found in Acts 24, verse 25, where Felix is, Paul is standing before Felix, the Roman official, and he shares the gospel with him. And Felix, he even trembles when he hears about the judgment to come. But he just tells Paul, look, go away for now, and I'll call you when I have a more convenient season. So my plea to you is, what are you doing? Are you fighting Christ? Are you fleeing from him? Or you're just doing nothing, just frozen, just won't do anything? Well, my plea to you is, get out of the burning plane while you can. And you can do so tonight by believing and being baptized. If you need to do that tonight, come forward now as we stand and sing.
I hope you all had a good class and everything is well with you. We want to remember those who are continually sick. and I don't mean that like they're enjoying ill health, but they got the crud and they can't get over it and they can't get better. It's just taking a long time. And there are many in that position, and we need to remember them. Of note is Sister Janet is not able to be out tonight. We want to especially remember Brother Alan Malone will be headed back our way later on this week. And so let's remember him in prayer as he travels and pray for a safe return. I don't have anything coming up. Singing is end of the month, the 28th. Call somebody and invite them to come to the singing. And somebody you know that would like to come. And if you're really charitable, go pick them up. And that's the way to make it happen. You're going to sing another song. All right. Jared's going to lead a closing song, and then I'm going to ask the preacher to lead the prayer.
We'll close with number 755 in the songbook. And the roll is called up yonder.
When the trumpet of the Lord shall sound, and time shall be no more, and the morning breaks eternal, bright and fair. When the saints of earth shall gather over on the other shore, and the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll is called up yonder, I'll be there. When the roll
Our God, when we do hear that final trumpet, may we feel relief. May we think, finally, and may we not be filled with fear, because there will be no place to run or to hide. So we thank you, dear God, for the faith that we can say, when the roll is called up yonder, we will be there. And because of the grace of your Son, we can say that. And through him we pray, amen.